The massive glass dome stretched across the dark void of space like a crystal bubble filled with light and life. Inside the Galactic Council Station, thousands of beings from dozens of worlds walked through halls made of materials that sparkled like diamonds. The air hummed with the sounds of different languages mixing together as representatives from across the galaxy conducted their daily business. Ambassador Young-Ho Kim stood at the edge of the main assembly hall, watching as delegates from various worlds took their seats. His human eyes tracked the familiar faces he had come to know over his 5 years of service here. The tall, thin Corvani representatives with their silver skin that looked like living metal. The floating Nethys delegates who existed as clouds of gas inside clear containment suits. The insect-like Velcron with their clicking mandibles and compound eyes that never seemed to blink. Young-Ho adjusted his simple black diplomatic uniform and walked toward his assigned seat. As he moved through the crowd, conversation stopped. Delegates turned to look at him with expressions that ranged from mild curiosity to barely hidden disgust. He had grown used to these looks over the years. To most of the galaxy, humans were the new species on the block, the young race that had somehow managed to stumble into space travel despite their primitive nature. "Ah, the human arrives," said Council Leader Hyeon-Soo Park as Young-Ho approached the human delegation area. Hyeon-Soo was one of only 3 humans who held any significant position in galactic politics. His weathered face showed the strain of decades spent trying to maintain diplomatic relations while watching his people being treated like children who had wandered into an adult conversation. "Any word from home about the mining rights discussion?" Young-Ho asked as he took his seat. Hyeon-Soo shook his head. "Earth Command says to keep pushing for fair terms, but you know how these debates go. The Corvani will claim humans are too emotionally unstable to handle large-scale operations. The Velcron will say our attachment to individual workers makes us inefficient. Same arguments they always use." The session began with the traditional opening ceremonies. As the various delegates presented their weekly reports, Young-Ho noticed the pattern that had become all too familiar. When alien species discussed trade agreements, they spoke as equals. When they debated territorial disputes, they treated each other with respect. When humans were mentioned, the tone changed completely. "The human colony on Kepler 442b has requested permission to expand their terraforming operations," announced Delegate Velcanar of the Velcron hegemony. His voice carried the same tone someone might use when discussing a child asking for extra dessert. "Our analysis suggests this expansion is driven by emotional attachment to the planet, rather than logical resource management." Several alien delegates nodded in agreement. Young-Ho felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. This was how it always went. Human decisions were dismissed as emotional. Human requests were seen as primitive instincts rather than calculated strategies. "The humans show promise," added Councillor Zix Moranth of the Corvani Assembly, his silver face reflecting the chamber lights. "But they remain limited by their biological nature. Their brain chemistry produces excessive emotional responses that interfere with rational decision-making." More nods from around the chamber. Young-Ho had heard these same arguments hundreds of times. The galaxy's older races had convinced themselves that logic and emotion were opposites. They believed their own lack of strong emotional responses made them superior to humans in every way that mattered. What they did not know, what they could never suspect, was that humans had been playing a very careful game since first contact 3 centuries ago. In the observation galleries above the main chamber, alien scientists watched the proceedings while taking detailed notes. Dr. Jin-Woo Lee, one of the few human researchers allowed in these facilities, worked alongside his alien colleagues while maintaining the careful facade that had kept humanity alive in a hostile galaxy. "Fascinating," muttered Dr. Korth Veland, a Nethys researcher whose gaseous form swirled with patterns that indicated deep thought. "Look how the human ambassador controls his facial expressions. Even when insulted, he maintains diplomatic composure. This suggests their emotional volatility may be more controllable than we previously assumed." Jin-Woo made a note in his tablet, while hiding a bitter smile. If only they knew how much control humans actually possessed. How much planning, how much preparation. Still, continued Dr. Korthveland. Their attachment to individual lives remains their greatest weakness. No logical species would risk entire fleets to save a few thousand civilians. Humans consistently make these irrational choices. Indeed, agreed Dr. Kixthalamar, a Corvani xenobiologist. Their neural patterns show excessive activity in regions associated with empathy and social bonding. This creates predictable behavioral patterns that could be exploited if necessary. Jinwoo nodded along with their analysis, playing his role perfectly. What these brilliant alien scientists failed to understand was that they were studying carefully crafted performances. Every human emotion they observed, every reaction they recorded, every weakness they identified, had been deliberately displayed for their benefit. Deep beneath Earth's surface in facilities hidden from galactic surveillance, the real work of humanity continued in secret. Director So-Young Choi stood in the main operations center of Facility 7, watching displays that showed information the Galactic Council would never be allowed to see. Advanced starship designs that made current human vessels look like ancient sailing ships. Weapon systems that could crack planets. Biological research that would horrify the galaxy's most logical minds. Status report, she said to the technicians working at stations around the room. Project Dark Fleet shows green across all metrics, reported Commander Tae-Hyung Lee. 74 Dreadnought-class vessels completed and hidden in deep space. Stealth systems testing at 100% effectiveness against all known alien sensor technologies. Biological Warfare Division? So-Young asked. Dr. Hyejin Kim's team has successfully mapped the genetic weaknesses of all major galactic species, answered another technician. Targeted elimination protocols are ready for deployment on 12 hours' notice. So-Young nodded with satisfaction. And our diplomatic facade? Maintaining perfectly. Ambassador Yang Ho continues to play the role of frustrated but ultimately harmless human representative. The aliens remain convinced that our emotional nature makes us weak and predictable. The irony was beautiful in its simplicity. The galaxy's most logical species had convinced themselves they understood humanity based on surface observations. They saw human tears and assumed weakness. They witnessed human anger and believed it made humans irrational. They observed human love and decided it created exploitable vulnerabilities. None of them considered that a species capable of such strong emotions might also be capable of unprecedented self-control. None of them wondered what humans might accomplish if they channeled their feelings into long-term planning instead of immediate action. None of them asked what 3 centuries of perceived weakness might actually be hiding. Back in the council chambers, the session continued with more of the same patronizing discussions about human limitations. Yong-ho maintained his diplomatic smile and played his part perfectly. He made the right protests at the right moments, showed just enough frustration to seem authentic, and allowed himself to be overruled in ways that reinforced alien assumptions about human weakness. Perhaps, suggested Councillor Zix Moranth near the end of the session, humans would benefit from closer supervision of their colonial expansion. Their emotional decision-making could lead to conflicts with more established species. An excellent suggestion, agreed Delegate Velkanar. The Velkron hegemony would be willing to provide oversight services for human colonies in our sector of space. Young-ho forced himself to look frustrated and helpless as the other delegates voted to approve this supervision. Inside, he felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Every insult, every dismissal, every attempt to control humanity was being carefully recorded. When the time came for Earth to show its true face, these same aliens would discover that humans remembered everything. The galaxy watched humanity and saw primitives struggling with emotions they could not control. What they failed to see was that humans had learned the most dangerous skill of all. They had learned to wait. They had learned to plan. They had learned to hide their true capabilities behind a mask of weakness that made their enemies comfortable. The Watchers believed they were studying humanity's flaws. In reality, they were counting down to their own destruction, one condescending remark at a time. The floating city of New Seoul drifted peacefully through the orange clouds of Kepler 442b, its silver spires reaching toward the alien sky like fingers of hope. 10 billion humans called this world home. building their lives in the massive atmospheric cities that hung suspended above the methane seas below. The morning shift was beginning as Captain Do-hyun Kim made his way through the corridors of Orbital Defense Station Alpha. Do-hyun paused at the main observation deck to look down at the world he protected. Hundreds of floating cities dotted the orange atmosphere like silver coins scattered across silk. Each city housed millions of people who had been born here, who had never seen Earth, who thought of these clouds and these strange skies as home. Transportation pods moved between the cities like schools of fish, carrying workers and families and children to their daily lives. "Beautiful view as always," said his second-in-command, Lieutenant Kyung-soo Park, joining him at the window. "Hard to believe our grandparents thought this place was uninhabitable when they first arrived." Do-hyun nodded. 3 generations of terraforming work. My great-grandfather helped design the first atmospheric processors. Now look at it. Below them, the city of New Busan was just coming alive with the morning cycle. Do-hyun could see the lights in the residential sectors turning on as families began their day. Children would be getting ready for school. Parents would be preparing for work in the manufacturing centers or the research labs or the agricultural domes. Normal people living normal lives, protected by the thin shell of defense satellites that Do-hyun commanded. "Any word from the Galactic Council about our expansion request?" Kyung-soo asked. "Still under review," Do-hyun replied, not mentioning the reports he had read about the dismissive comments from alien delegates. "You know how they are about human projects. They think we move too fast, make too many emotional decisions." In the city of New Incheon, engineer Mi-young Kim was already deep into her morning routine at Terraforming Station 7. As Do-hyun's younger sister, she had inherited the same stubborn determination that kept their family working on impossible projects. Today she was reviewing the atmospheric composition reports, tracking the slow but steady progress of making Kepler 442b more Earth-like. "The oxygen levels in Sector 12 are up another 2%, reported her assistant, Dr. Sang-woo Lee. "At this rate, we might have breathable atmosphere in the lower cloud layers within 50 years. Mi-young smiled as she updated her records. "My daughter might actually walk under an open sky someday. Not in a dome, not in a suit, but actually breathing real air on real ground. Speaking of your daughter, how is little Eun-hai doing with her art project?" "Still working on that painting of Earth," Mi-young said with a laugh. "She has never seen it, but she paints it like she remembers it from dreams. Blue skies, green trees, all the things we tell stories about." Their conversation was interrupted by an incoming priority message. Mi-young frowned as she read the communication from the orbital defense stations. "That is strange. They want all terraforming stations to run full diagnostics on our emergency evacuation systems. Probably just routine maintenance," Sang-woo suggested, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. High above the planet's atmosphere, Do-hyun was reading the same diagnostic requests with growing concern. His defense network had detected unusual movement in the outer system. Ships that did not respond to standard identification requests. Energy signatures that matched no known human or allied alien vessels. "Captain," called Specialist Haiwan Choi from the communication station, "I am picking up a large fleet movement at the edge of sensor range. Configuration suggests Velcron hegemony vessels." Do-hyun felt his stomach drop. "How many ships?" "Initial count shows at least 200 combat vessels, sir." "That is enough firepower to level every city on the planet." "Open a channel to the fleet," Do-hyun ordered. "This is Captain Do-hyun Kim of Kepler 442b Defense Command. You are entering human colonial space without authorization. Please state your intentions." The response came back in the cold, clicking voice typical of Velcron communications. "Human Defense Command, this is Fleet Commander Zal Vekthos of the Velcron Hegemony. You will stand down all defensive systems and prepare for planetary cleansing operations." "Cleansing operations?" Do-hyun repeated, hoping he had misunderstood. "Correct. The Velcron hegemony has determined that human emotional attachment to individual lives makes your species an inefficient use of galactic resources. This world will be reallocated to more logical purposes." The bridge fell silent. Do-hyun stared at the communication panel, trying to process what he had just heard. "You are talking about 10 billion people. 10 billion human lives. Correct. The elimination will be conducted efficiently to minimize resource waste. You have 1 hour to evacuate essential personnel. All others will be eliminated." Do-hyun cut the communication and immediately activated the planetary emergency alert system. Throughout the floating cities of Kepler 442b, warning sirens began to sound. People looked up from their daily routines with confusion and growing fear, as emergency broadcasts filled every screen and speaker. In New Busan, Dr. Sung-min Park rushed from his medical research facility toward the emergency command center. As the colony's chief medical officer, he was responsible for coordinating evacuation procedures. But as he ran through the corridors, seeing families with small children trying to reach escape pods, he realized the horrible truth. "How many evacuation ships do we have?" he asked the emergency coordinator. 47 transport vessels, various sizes, maybe capacity for 500,000 people if we pack them beyond safety limits. 500,000, Sung-min repeated quietly. Out of 10 billion. The math was simple and terrible. Even if they could get every transport ship loaded and launched, they could save maybe 1% of the population. The rest would die here in the orange clouds of the world they had built with their own hands. Mi-young received the evacuation order while she was still trying to understand what was happening. She grabbed her daughter Yun-hai and ran toward the nearest transport bay. But the corridors were already packed with panicked families. Children were crying. Parents were making impossible decisions about who to save and who to leave behind. "Mommy, what is happening?" Honey asked, clutching her art supplies. "We have to go on a trip, baby," Mi-young said, trying to keep her voice steady. A very fast trip. But as they reached the transport bay, Mi-young saw the truth. Thousands of people were pushing toward ships that could hold only hundreds. Security officers were trying to maintain order, but everyone could see the numbers. Most of them would not make it off the planet. Do-hyun watched from his defense station as the first Velcron attack ships entered the atmosphere. His small fleet of defensive satellites opened fire, but they had been designed to protect against pirates and small raiders, not a full-scale military assault. The Velcron ships brushed aside his defenses like an adult swatting away insects. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Kyung-soo Park, "the enemy is targeting the evacuation ships." Do-hyun watched in horror as Velcron interceptors began systematically destroying the transport vessels as they tried to escape the planet's atmosphere. The alien fleet was not just attacking the cities. They were making sure no one could escape. They are not just cleansing the planet, he realized aloud. They are making sure there are no survivors to tell what happened here. In the medical center of New Seoul, Dr. Sung-min Park worked frantically to coordinate emergency medical response, but there was nothing to respond to. The Velcron weapons did not wound or injure. They simply erased. Entire city blocks vanished in brilliant flashes of light. Millions of people disappeared in seconds, leaving nothing behind but empty air and falling debris. Mi-young held her daughter close as their transport ship shuddered under enemy fire. Around them, other families huddled together, holding each other as the ship bucked and twisted through evasive maneuvers. Through the small windows, they could see other transport vessels being destroyed, their lights winking out like candles in a storm. "Will we see Daddy again?" Yun-hee asked. Mi-young looked out at the orange clouds where her brother Do-hyun was still fighting his hopeless battle against impossible odds. "Yes," she whispered, knowing it was a lie. "We will see him again." The attack lasted 18 hours. When it was over, the floating cities of Kepler 442b were gone. The orbital defense stations were silent wreckage. The 10 billion humans who had called this world home were dead, their bodies scattered through the orange atmosphere like ash. The few transport ships that had managed to escape carried the news to other human colonies and eventually to Earth itself. Along with the refugees came recordings of the final transmissions from Kepler 442b. Videos of families saying goodbye, messages from people who knew they were about to die but wanted someone to remember that they had lived. The Galactic Council received news of the cleansing operation with the same detached interest they showed for most galactic events. Some species expressed mild disapproval of the methods used, but others nodded approvingly at what they considered an efficient solution to the human expansion problem. Earth received the news in complete silence. No protests to the Galactic Council. No demands for justice. No emotional outbursts or threats of revenge. Just silence that stretched on, growing deeper and more ominous with each passing hour. The galaxy assumed this silence was grief, a primitive emotional response that would eventually pass, leaving humans more compliant and easier to manage. They were wrong. The Galactic Communication Center on Nexus Prime fell quiet for the first time in 3 centuries. Operator Velthanos, a Corvani technician whose silver face reflected the dim lights of his control station, stared at his monitoring displays with growing confusion. Every human communication channel had gone dark at exactly the same moment 72 hours ago. "Still nothing?" asked his supervisor, approaching the station with careful steps. "Complete silence across all frequencies," Velthanos replied, his metallic voice carrying notes of uncertainty. "No trade communications, no diplomatic messages, no civilian transmissions. Even their entertainment broadcasts have stopped." At nearby stations, other operators monitored different species across the galaxy. The usual chatter of interstellar commerce continued as normal. Corvani merchants discussed mining rights. Nethys researchers shared scientific data. Velcron administrators coordinated resource distribution. But the sections dedicated to human space showed nothing but empty static. "Perhaps they are mourning," suggested the supervisor. "Humans are known for their emotional responses to death. This silence might be some kind of primitive grief ritual." Velthanos nodded, but something about the situation felt wrong. In all his years of monitoring galactic communications, he had never seen any species go completely silent. Even during wars or natural disasters, some signals always got through. Emergency broadcasts, military communications, distress calls, something always leaked through the noise. But human space was a void. Not just quiet, but actively empty, as if someone had reached out and turned off every transmitter across dozens of star systems. On Earth, deep beneath the Himalayan mountains, Admiral Taehyung Lee stood in the war room that few humans knew existed. The chamber stretched for hundreds of meters in every direction, its walls covered with displays showing star maps, fleet positions, and weapon readiness reports. Technicians moved between control stations with quiet efficiency, their faces set in expressions of cold determination. "Communication blackout is holding steady," reported Captain Woojin Park from the Operations Center. "All human colonies have implemented Protocol 7. No external signals, no trade activity, no diplomatic contact." "Galactic response?" Taehyung asked, initial confusion followed by dismissive analysis. "Intelligence intercepts suggest they believe we are experiencing species-wide emotional breakdown." Taehyung allowed himself a thin smile. The galaxy's greatest weakness was their absolute certainty that they understood human psychology. They had spent centuries studying human emotional responses and had convinced themselves that strong feelings made humans predictable and weak. "Status on Dark Fleet? All 74 dreadnoughts are in position," reported Commander Kyung-Soo Lee from the Fleet Coordination Station. "Stealth systems are holding at maximum efficiency. Enemy sensors show no indication they detect our vessels." Biological Warfare Division. Dr. Haijin Kim reports all targeted viruses are ready for deployment. Genetic markers for Velcron, Corvani, and Nethys have been confirmed. Delivery systems are loaded and standing by. Taehyung nodded with satisfaction. "And the President?" "President Ji-Hai Choi has authorized implementation of Operation Extinction Protocol. All department heads have confirmed readiness." In another section of the facility, Dr. Hae-Jin Kim reviewed the final reports from her research team. For over a century, human scientists had been quietly studying the genetic structure of every major galactic species. What the aliens thought was innocent scientific cooperation had actually been a systematic mapping of biological vulnerabilities. "The Velcron virus is particularly elegant," she explained to her assistant, Dr. Chan Woo Park. "It targets the specific neural pathways that control their hive mind communication. Once infected, they lose the ability to coordinate with other members of their species." "And the Corvani?" "Their silicon-based biology makes them resistant to most organic weapons, but we found a way to disrupt the electrical fields that hold their crystalline structures together. The breakdown is irreversible. The Nethys, atmospheric poisoning. We can alter the chemical composition of their gas giant homes to make them uninhabitable for their species while leaving them perfectly suitable for other life forms." Chanwu reviewed the files with professional detachment. "How long did this research take?" 230 years, Heejin replied. "Every cultural exchange, every joint scientific project, every diplomatic mission where aliens shared biological data with us. We have been patient." Meanwhile, in the Galactic Council chambers, the emergency session was beginning its third day. Ambassador Young-Ho Kim's empty chair sat in the human delegation section, like an accusation. Around the circular chamber, delegates from dozens of species debated the meaning of humanity's silence. "They will recover," declared Councillor Zix Moranth of the Corvani Assembly. Humans experience intense grief responses, but these emotional states are temporary. They lack the mental discipline to maintain prolonged isolation. Perhaps we should send diplomatic missions to their colonies, suggested Delegate Quinn Valor of the Nethys Confederation. Offer counseling services to help them process their emotional trauma. Several delegates nodded in agreement. The discussion continued with the same patronizing tone that had characterized galactic attitudes toward humanity for centuries. Some expressed mild concern about the complete communication blackout, but most seemed confident that humans would eventually return to their assigned place in the galactic order. In the observation galleries, alien intelligence analysts watched the proceedings while reviewing their latest reports on human activity. Dr. Korth Veland swirled his gaseous form in patterns of deep thought as he studied surveillance data from human space. Curious, he muttered to his colleague. Our long-range sensors detect no decrease in industrial activity on human worlds. Power consumption remains at normal levels. Transportation networks appear to be functioning. What does that suggest? Asked Dr. Kix Thalamar. If humans were truly paralyzed by grief, we would expect to see disruptions in their daily activities. Instead, their colonies seem to be operating with unusual efficiency. Perhaps their emotional response manifests differently than we assumed. Perhaps, Korth Veland agreed, but his tone suggested doubt. Back on Earth, President Jihai Choi stood before the assembled leaders of humanity's hidden military establishment. The room contained generals and admirals, whose very existence was classified above galactic security levels. Scientists whose research would horrify the galaxy's most logical minds. Engineers who had spent their careers building weapons that violated every interstellar treaty humanity had ever signed. The galaxy has shown us who they truly are, she began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. They have demonstrated that they see us as disposable. 10 billion of our people died, and their response was approval. Murmurs of cold anger rippled through the assembled officers. For 3 centuries, we have played the role they expected. We have been the emotional, primitive species that posed no real threat to their established order. We have smiled at their insults, accepted their restrictions, and allowed them to believe they understood us. She paused, looking around the room at faces set in expressions of barely controlled fury. Operation Extinction Protocol is now active. You have your targets. You have your weapons. You have your orders. Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. Show them what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. The meeting dispersed in silence. Across human space, fleets that had been hidden for generations began to move. Weapons that had been theoretical for centuries were loaded and armed. Scientists prepared biological agents that would rewrite the genetic future of entire species. The galaxy continued to debate humanity's emotional state while human dreadnoughts moved through dark space toward their targets. Alien analysts discussed primitive grief responses while human engineers made final preparations for weapons that could crack planets. The silence stretched on, growing deeper and more ominous with each passing hour. What the galaxy had interpreted as weakness was actually the sound of humanity taking off its mask. In 72 hours of perfect quiet, humans had transformed from the galaxy's youngest species into its most dangerous predator. The Watchers, who had spent centuries studying human emotions, were about to learn that the most terrifying human emotion of all was cold, calculated patience, finally reaching its end. The silence was not grief. It was the pause between lightning and thunder, and the storm that was coming would reshape the galaxy forever. Earth received the news in complete silence. No protests to the Galactic Council. No demands for justice. No emotional outbursts or threats of revenge. Just silence that stretched on, growing deeper and more ominous with each passing hour. The galaxy assumed this silence was grief, a primitive emotional response that would eventually pass, leaving humans more compliant and easier to manage. They were wrong. The Galactic Communication Center on Nexus Prime fell quiet for the first time in 3 centuries. Operator Velthanos, a Corvani technician whose silver face reflected the dim lights of his control station, stared at his monitoring displays with growing confusion. Every human communication channel had gone dark at exactly the same moment 72 hours ago. Still nothing? Asked his supervisor, approaching the station with careful steps. Complete silence across all frequencies, Velthanos replied, his metallic voice carrying notes of uncertainty. No trade communications, no diplomatic messages, no civilian transmissions. Even their entertainment broadcasts have stopped. At nearby stations, other operators monitored different species across the galaxy. The usual chatter of interstellar commerce continued as normal. Corvani merchants discussed mining rights. Nethys researchers shared scientific data. Velcron administrators coordinated resource distribution. But the sections dedicated to human space showed nothing but empty static. Perhaps they are mourning, suggested the supervisor. Humans are known for their emotional responses to death. This silence might be some kind of primitive grief ritual. Velthanos nodded, but something about the situation felt wrong. In all his years of monitoring galactic communications, he had never seen any species go completely silent. Even during wars or natural disasters, some signals always got through. Emergency broadcast, military communications, distress calls. Something always leaked through the noise. But human space was a void. Not just quiet, but actively empty, as if someone had reached out and turned off every transmitter across dozens of star systems. On Earth, deep beneath the Himalayan mountains, Admiral Tae-Hyung Lee stood in the war room that few humans knew existed. The chamber stretched for hundreds of meters in every direction, its walls covered with displays showing star maps, fleet positions, and weapon readiness reports. Technicians moved between control stations with quiet efficiency, their faces set in expressions of cold determination. Communication blackout is holding steady, reported Captain Woojin Park from the Operations Center. All human colonies have implemented Protocol 7. No external signals, no trade activity, no diplomatic contact. Galactic response? Tae-Hyung asked. Initial confusion followed by dismissive analysis. Intelligence intercepts suggest they believe we are experiencing species-wide emotional breakdown. Tae-Hyung allowed himself a thin smile. The galaxy's greatest weakness was their absolute certainty that they understood human psychology. They had spent centuries studying human emotional responses and had convinced themselves that strong feelings made humans predictable and weak. Status on Dark Fleet? All 74 dreadnoughts are in position, reported Commander Kyung-Soo Lee from the Fleet Coordination Station. Stealth systems are holding at maximum efficiency. Enemy sensors show no indication they detect our vessels. Biological Warfare Division. Dr. Haijin Kim reports all targeted viruses are ready for deployment. Genetic markers for Velcron, Corvani, and Nethys have been confirmed. Delivery systems are loaded and standing by. Tae-Hyung nodded with satisfaction. And the President? President Ji-Hai Choi has authorized implementation of Operation Extinction Protocol. All department heads have confirmed readiness. In another section of the facility, Dr. Hae-Jin Kim reviewed the final reports from her research team. For over a century, human scientists had been quietly studying the genetic structure of every major galactic species. What the aliens thought was innocent scientific cooperation had actually been a systematic mapping of biological vulnerabilities. The Velcron virus is particularly elegant, she explained to her assistant, Dr. Chan Woo Park. It targets the specific neural pathways that control their hive mind communication. Once infected, they lose the ability to coordinate with other members of their species. And the Corvani? Their silicon-based biology makes them resistant to most organic weapons, but we found a way to disrupt the electrical fields that hold their crystalline structures together. The breakdown is irreversible. The Nethys, atmospheric poisoning. We can alter the chemical composition of their gas giant homes to make them uninhabitable for their species while leaving them perfectly suitable for other life forms. Chanwu reviewed the files with professional detachment. How long did this research take? 230 years, Heejin replied. Every cultural exchange, every joint scientific project, every diplomatic mission where aliens shared biological data with us. We have been patient. Meanwhile, in the Galactic Council chambers, the emergency session was beginning its third day. Ambassador Young-Ho Kim's empty chair sat in the human delegation section, like an accusation. Around the circular chamber, delegates from dozens of species debated the meaning of humanity's silence. They will recover, declared Councillor Zix Moranth of the Corvani Assembly. Humans experience intense grief responses, but these emotional states are temporary. They lack the mental discipline to maintain prolonged isolation. Perhaps we should send diplomatic missions to their colonies, suggested Delegate Quinn Valor of the Nethys Confederation. Offer counseling services to help them process their emotional trauma. Several delegates nodded in agreement. The discussion continued with the same patronizing tone that had characterized galactic attitudes toward humanity for centuries. Some expressed mild concern about the complete communication blackout, but most seemed confident that humans would eventually return to their assigned place in the galactic order. In the observation galleries, alien intelligence analysts watched the proceedings while reviewing their latest reports on human activity. Dr. Korthveland swirled his gaseous form in patterns of deep thought as he studied surveillance data from human space. Curious, he muttered to his colleague. Our long-range sensors detect no decrease in industrial activity on human worlds. Power consumption remains at normal levels. Transportation networks appear to be functioning. What does that suggest? Asked Dr. Kix Thalamar. If humans were truly paralyzed by grief, we would expect to see disruptions in their daily activities. Instead, their colonies seem to be operating with unusual efficiency. Perhaps their emotional response manifests differently than we assumed. Perhaps, Korthveland agreed, but his tone suggested doubt. Back on Earth, President Ji-hai Choi stood before the assembled leaders of humanity's hidden military establishment. The room contained generals and admirals, whose very existence was classified above galactic security levels. Scientists whose research would horrify the galaxy's most logical minds. Engineers who had spent their careers building weapons that violated every interstellar treaty humanity had ever signed. The galaxy has shown us who they truly are, she began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. They have demonstrated that they see us as disposable. 10 billion of our people died, and their response was approval. Murmurs of cold anger rippled through the assembled officers. For 3 centuries, we have played the role they expected. We have been the emotional, primitive species that posed no real threat to their established order. We have smiled at their insults, accepted their restrictions, and allowed them to believe they understood us. She paused, looking around the room at faces set in expressions of barely controlled fury. Operation Extinction Protocol is now active. You have your targets. You have your weapons. You have your orders. Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. Show them what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. The meeting dispersed in silence. Across human space, fleets that had been hidden for generations began to move. Weapons that had been theoretical for centuries were loaded and armed. Scientists prepared biological agents that would rewrite the genetic future of entire species. The galaxy continued to debate humanity's emotional state while human dreadnoughts moved through dark space toward their targets. Alien analysts discussed primitive grief responses while human engineers made final preparations for weapons that could crack planets. The silence stretched on, growing deeper and more ominous with each passing hour. What the galaxy had interpreted as weakness was actually the sound of humanity taking off its mask. In 72 hours of perfect quiet, humans had transformed from the galaxy's youngest species into its most dangerous predator. The Watchers, who had spent centuries studying human emotions, were about to learn that the most terrifying human emotion of all was cold, calculated patience, finally reaching its end. The silence was not grief. It was the pause between lightning and thunder, and the storm that was coming would reshape the galaxy forever. The emotional responses, Delegate Quinveller said weakly. The primitive decision-making patterns, the attachment to individual lives. All carefully calculated to make you comfortable, Jinwoo replied. We studied your psychology as carefully as you studied ours. We learned that logical species have a weakness for believing they are superior to emotional ones. We gave you exactly what you expected to see. He turned to address the entire assembly, his voice carrying across the chamber with perfect clarity. You spent 3 centuries convinced that human emotions made us weak and predictable. You never considered that a species capable of love might also be capable of perfect hate. You never wondered what 300 years of accumulated insults might produce when channeled through minds that learned to think in terms of centuries rather than moments. The silence stretched on as the galaxy's most logical species tried to process the magnitude of their miscalculation. The cleansing of Kepler 442b was your final mistake, Jinwoo concluded. 10 billion humans died while you watched with approval. Today you discover the price of that approval. With that, he turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving behind the representatives of species that were learning too late what it meant to awaken a sleeping giant. that had been pretending to sleep for 300 years. Colonel Seung-won Choi stood on the bridge of the biological warfare vessel Nemesis as it approached the Velcron breeding world of Kilvathan. Below them, the planet's surface teemed with nursery complexes where young Velcron developed from larvae to full adults. Billions of the next generation of the insect-like species lived in the vast hive structures that covered every continent. Atmospheric. Delivery systems are ready, reported Dr. Hyejin Kim from the Biological Warfare Station. The viral agent is specifically designed to target Velcron neural pathways. It will be completely harmless to any other life forms on the planet. Deployment range? Seung-won asked. Full planetary coverage in 6 hours. The virus spreads through their natural chemical communication networks. Once it takes hold, it will spread to every Velcron on the planet within 48 hours. Seung-won watched the planet rotate slowly beneath them. He thought about the 10 billion humans who had died on Kepler 442b, while the galaxy watched with cold approval. The Velcron had called it efficient resource management. Today they would learn what true efficiency looked like. Deploy the virus, he ordered. The release was invisible and silent. Microscopic capsules spread through Kilvathan's atmosphere, each one containing a biological weapon that had been designed over decades of careful research. The virus did not kill quickly or dramatically. Instead, it systematically shut down the specific neural connections that allowed Velcron to communicate with their hive mind network. Within hours, the planet's entire population began to lose the shared consciousness that defined their species. Individual Velcron found themselves isolated in their own minds for the first time in their evolutionary history. The psychological trauma was immediate and devastating. Unable to function as separate beings, they simply stopped. Stopped working, stopped eating, stopped caring for their young. The death was slow and thorough. On the Corvani homeworld of Sil Moranth, Admiral Young-Soo Kim coordinated the systematic destruction of one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. The Corvani had evolved as silicon-based life forms, building their cities from living crystal that grew in mathematical perfection over thousands of years. Gravitational. Bombardment is proceeding on schedule, reported Captain Minho Park from the Weapons Control Station. We have successfully collapsed the crystal matrices in all major population centers. Young-Soo studied the tactical displays showing the beautiful crystalline cities crumbling into dust. Each structure had been a work of art that took centuries to grow. Each collapse represented millions of Corvani lives ended in seconds. Resistance? He asked. Minimal. Their defensive systems were designed to repel energy weapons and projectile attacks. They have no defense against gravitational manipulation. Continue the bombardment. Target the secondary cities next. The Corvani had prided themselves on being the galaxy's most logical species. They made decisions based on pure mathematical reasoning, without the emotional clouding that they believed made other species inferior. Their logic had led them to conclude that human emotional responses made humanity weak and controllable. Their logic had been wrong. In the gas giant system of Neth Kurion, Dr. A. Young Park monitored the atmospheric transformation of the Nethys homeworld. The process was elegant in its simplicity. Human atmospheric processors introduced specific compounds that reacted with the methane-rich environment to produce a cascade of chemical changes. Transformation is 40% complete, reported her chief atmospheric engineer. The methane levels have dropped below the threshold for Nethys survival, and the oxygen-nitrogen mixture? Building steadily. In another 12 hours, the atmosphere will be perfectly breathable for human colonists. A. Young watched the real-time analysis of the planet's changing atmosphere. The Nethys had existed as sentient gas clouds, living beings made of organized chemical reactions within the methane storms of their homeworld. As the atmospheric composition changed, their very essence was being dissolved. "Sir," called the communications officer, "we are receiving final transmissions from the Nethys leadership. They are requesting terms for surrender." "Terms?" A. Young repeated. "Did they offer terms to the children of Kepler 442b? "No, sir." "Then we offer them the same consideration they showed to our people. Continue the atmospheric modification." The transformation continued without pause. Within hours, the last of the Nethys would be dispersed into individual molecules, their consciousness scattered to the solar winds. Their homeworld would become another garden world suitable for human habitation. Across the galaxy, the systematic extinction of 3 major species continued with mechanical precision. Human forces moved from world to world. eliminating every trace of the civilizations that had approved the cleansing of Kepler 442b. There were no emotional outbursts, no passionate speeches about revenge. The destruction was carried out with the same cold efficiency that the aliens had once admired in themselves. In the hidden command centers on Earth, President Ji-hai Choi received status reports with the detached interest of a scientist monitoring an experiment. Velcron hegemony status? She asked. 85% population, loss across all major worlds, reported Admiral Tae-hyung Lee. Remaining, populations are isolated and unable to maintain their civilization without hive mind, coordination, Corvani assembly. Crystal cities destroyed on all primary worlds. Their silicon-based biology makes them unable to adapt to the geological instability we have created. Extinction timeline, 72 hours. Nethys Confederation, atmospheric transformation complete on 12 worlds. The remaining gas giant colonies will be processed over the next week. Ji-hai nodded. Galactic response? Terror. The remaining species are offering complete surrender and tribute payments. Some are requesting permission to relocate to reservation worlds under human protection. And the species that did not participate in the approval of Kepler 442b? As planned, they have been left completely unharmed. Several have already sent diplomatic missions offering alliance with humanity. The precision of the operation was its most terrifying aspect. This was not random destruction or emotional revenge. Every target had been carefully selected based on their specific role in approving or supporting the cleansing of the human colony. Species that had remained neutral or had opposed the action found themselves untouched by human wrath. In the ruins of what had once been the greatest Corvani city on Silmoranth, Captain Min-ho Lee stood among the crystalline debris that had once been home to millions of silicon-based beings. The mathematical perfection of their architecture was reduced to geometric fragments scattered across the landscape, like broken glass. "Any signs of survivors?" asked his lieutenant. "Negative. The gravitational weapons disrupted their cellular structure at the molecular level. Their bodies simply came apart." Min-ho activated his communication system to broadcast a message that would be recorded by any remaining Corvani monitoring systems. "This is Captain Min-ho Lee of the Human Defense Force. Your species spent 3 centuries studying our emotional responses and concluded that our attachment to individual lives made us weak. Today you learn that a species capable of perfect love is also capable of perfect hate. Your civilization ends because you could not understand the difference between restraint and weakness." The broadcast ended, leaving only silence across the dead world. On the Velcron world of Zalvectos, Colonel Sungwon Choi walked through the empty corridors of what had been the galaxy's largest hive city. The virus had done its work with the precision his scientists had promised. The Velcron bodies showed no signs of violence or trauma. They had simply stopped functioning when their connection to the hive mind was severed. "Total casualty count?" he asked his aide. 900 billion on this world alone. The virus spread exactly as predicted through their chemical communication networks. And the other Velcron worlds? 6 months after the cleansing of Kepler 442b, President Na-young Park stood before the reformed Galactic Assembly in the same chamber where human representatives had once endured condescending lectures about emotional instability. The room had been significantly smaller then, when 3 major species had filled the upper galleries with their delegates. Now those sections stood empty, their former occupants reduced to dust scattered across dead worlds. The remaining delegates sat in uncomfortable silence as Na-young took her place at the podium that had once been reserved for the council, leaders of extinct species. Behind her, the massive display screen showed the current state of human space. Dozens of former alien worlds now bearing human names, their surfaces covered with the silver domes of new colonial settlements. "Representatives of the surviving galactic species," Na-young began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, without the need for amplification. "6 months ago, you watched 10 billion humans die and called it efficient resource management. Today, we gather to discuss the new efficiency that your approval has purchased." Delegate Yun Solar of the 10th Ari Republic shifted nervously in his seat. His species had been one of the few to oppose the cleansing of Kepler 442b, and they now found themselves in the unexpected position of being humanity's preferred trading partners. The human government extends appreciation to those species that demonstrated Wisdom during the recent unpleasantness, Nayung continued. The Tenthari, the Morvani, and the Quellan Collective will find their territorial claims expanded and their trading rights enhanced under the new galactic order. She paused to let this information sink in before continuing. For those species that expressed approval or remained neutral during the genocide of our people, different arrangements have been made. The screens behind her shifted to show the reservation worlds that had been established in the outer systems of various stellar regions. Entire species that had once controlled vast territories now lived on, single worlds under human oversight. The Xarian Empire will be permitted to maintain their civilization on the world designated Human Reserve 7, Nayung announced. Population limits have been established to ensure sustainable resource usage. Expansion beyond their assigned world is prohibited. Ambassador Keth Zarion, whose species had once commanded 12 star systems, sat with his head bowed in acceptance. The alternative to the reservation was the same fate that had befallen the Velkron, Corvani, and Nethys. The Palladian hierarchy has been relocated to Human Reserve 12. Their previous worlds have been converted to agricultural colonies to support human expansion. Similar announcements followed for a dozen species that had learned too late the cost of underestimating humanity. Each had been reduced from interstellar civilizations to protected populations living under human supervision. Dr. Chan Woo Kim, now Director of Galactic Species Management, sat in the observation gallery taking notes on the proceedings. His department oversaw the integration of surviving alien populations into humanity's new order. It was a position that required careful balance between protection and control. The reservation system ensures species survival while preventing future threats to human interests. He had explained to his staff earlier that morning. We are not interested in genocide for its own sake. We are interested in making sure that no species ever again has the capability to threaten human civilians. The transformation of galactic politics had been swift and comprehensive. Trade routes that had existed for millennia were now controlled by human customs stations. Scientific research that had once been conducted through interspecies cooperation was now directed by human oversight committees. Diplomatic protocols that had evolved over centuries were replaced by simple submission to human authority. Ambassador Soo-Jin Lee, once a junior diplomatic aide who had watched human representatives being dismissed with casual contempt, now served as Director of Interspecies Relations. Her office on Earth received a steady stream of alien delegations seeking permission for everything from minor territorial adjustments to basic scientific exchanges. The Borvani Confederacy requests permission to establish a research station in the Kepler 7 system. She read from the morning's diplomatic correspondence. They want to study the gravitational anomalies left by our weapons testing. Approved, replied her aide. But with human observers and limited access to the data, the Halani Collective wants to know if they can expand their population limits on Reserve 9. Denied. They expressed enthusiasm for the cleansing of Kepler 442b. They get minimal living space. The process continued through dozens of requests that would have once been handled as negotiations between equals. Now they were administrative decisions made by human bureaucrats who had absolute authority over species that once considered themselves the masters of the galaxy. On the former Velkron homeworld, now called New Kepler, 10 billion human colonists walked through cities built from the recycled materials of their predecessors. The massive hive structures had been dismantled and converted into vertical farms and manufacturing centers, where insect-like beings had once coordinated the activities of trillions through hive-mind connections. Human families now raised children who would never know a time when humanity was considered weak. Jin-A Kim, a 7-year-old girl born on New Kepler, played in parks that had been constructed over Velkron burial sites. She attended schools where the walls displayed memorial plaques listing the names of every human who had died in the original massacre. Her textbooks contained detailed explanations of why the previous inhabitants were no longer alive. Teacher, she asked during history class, why did the aliens think humans were weak? Her teacher, Ms. Hai-Young Park, smiled at the question that came up in every generation of children born after the Extinction Protocol. Because we let them think that, Jin-A. Sometimes the best way to protect yourself is to make dangerous people believe you are not dangerous. But we were dangerous all along. Very dangerous. We just hid it very well. The conversation was typical of education in the new human colonies. Children learned about the time when humanity had been forced to pretend to be something they were not. They studied the careful deception that had kept the species alive while they prepared for inevitable conflict. Most importantly, they learned that true strength sometimes meant allowing others to underestimate you until the moment when underestimation became fatal. In the crystal gardens that had once been Corvani cities, human architects worked to preserve some of the mathematical beauty of the silicon-based civilization, while adapting the structures for human use. The geometric perfection of Corvani art was incorporated into human buildings, as a reminder of what had been lost when logical species made illogical decisions about human capabilities. Engineer Du Young Choi supervised the conversion of a Corvani crystal spire into a human residential complex. The building's structure required careful modification to support human gravity and atmosphere requirements while maintaining the aesthetic appeal of the original design. It seems wasteful to destroy such beautiful architecture, commented his assistant. Beauty created by people who approve genocide loses some of its appeal, Du Young replied. But you are right that destruction for its own sake serves no purpose. We preserve what is useful and beautiful while remembering why its creators are no longer here to appreciate it. The policy of selective preservation extended throughout former alien territories. Human colonists lived in converted alien cities, worked in adapted alien facilities, and used modified alien technologies, but always with the understanding that these things existed as monuments to the consequences of threatening human civilians. On the gas giant world of New Haven, formerly Neth Kurion, human atmospheric engineers completed the transformation that had begun during the Extinction Protocol. The methane storms that had once housed billions of sentient gas beings now provided industrial materials for human manufacturing processes. Dr. Kyungmin Lee, head of atmospheric development, stood on an observation platform watching the chemical processing plants extract useful compounds from the planet's modified atmosphere. Production efficiency is up 30% this quarter, he reported to his supervisor. And the ecological impact? Minimal. The atmospheric processors eliminated the previous ecosystem, but the new one is stable and sustainable for human use. We can maintain industrial operations here for centuries without environmental degradation. The transformation of Neth Kurion represented the ultimate expression of human efficiency. An entire world had been converted from supporting one species to supporting another, with minimal waste and maximum utility. The Nethys had praised logic and efficiency above all other values. Humanity had demonstrated both concepts with a thoroughness that exceeded anything the gas beings had ever achieved. In the Galactic Assembly Chamber, President Na-Young Park concluded her address to the surviving species. The new order is not complicated, she said. Human interests come first. Human civilians are protected above all other considerations. Species that accept these principles will prosper under human guidance. Species that challenge these principles will discover what happened to the Velcron, Corvani, and Nethys. She paused to look around the chamber at delegates who no longer debated human requests, but simply waited to learn what humanity had decided for them. Some of you may wonder if this makes humanity the same as the species we eliminated. The difference is simple. We do not pretend that our dominance is logical or just. We do not claim that other species are inferior or that their elimination serves some greater good. We simply acknowledge that we have the power to protect what we value, and we use that power without apology. The galaxy spent 3 centuries teaching us that strength was the only currency that mattered in interstellar relations. You taught us that emotional species were considered weak and disposable. You taught us that logical species believed themselves superior and entitled to make decisions about who lived and who died. Today you live in a galaxy shaped by those lessons. We learned them very well. The session ended with no debate, no questions, no discussion. The surviving species filed out of the chamber in silence, returning to their worlds to implement whatever policies humanity had decreed for them. Ambassador Sujin Lee remained behind as the chamber emptied. She stood where the human delegation had once sat in uncomfortable chairs, designed for species that considered themselves humanity's superiors. Now those species asked permission to exist while humans decided which requests were worthy of approval. Any regrets? Asked her aide. About the extinction of 3 major civilizations? Sujin considered the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that they forced us to reveal what we were truly capable of. I regret that 10 billion humans had to die before the galaxy learned to take us seriously. But I do not regret that humanity survived. I do not regret that our children will grow up in a galaxy where human life is valued and protected. I do not regret that species which approved genocide no longer exist to threaten future generations. She gathered her papers and prepared to leave the chamber where the new galactic order had been formally established. The galaxy wanted to see what happened when logical species managed emotional ones, she said quietly. Instead, they discovered what happened when the most dangerous species in the galaxy finally stopped pretending to be harmless. Outside the assembly station, human patrol ships moved through space lanes that had once been controlled by alien traffic management systems. Trade vessels carried goods between worlds that flew human flags instead of the banners of extinct civilizations. Communication networks transmitted messages in languages that included human tongues alongside the surviving alien dialects. The stars themselves bore witness to the transformation that had begun with the deaths of 10 billion humans on Kepler 442b and ended with humanity's emergence as the galaxy's undisputed masters. The species that had once watched human suffering with cold approval now lived or died based on human decisions made with the same detached efficiency they had once admired in themselves. The galaxy had learned too late that there were sleeping giants among the stars, and that some lessons could only be taught through consequences that lasted forever. Humanity had been patient, had been careful, had been wise enough to hide their true nature until the moment when hiding was no longer necessary. Now they ruled a galaxy that would never again mistake human restraint for human weakness, because there was no one left alive who remembered making that fatal error. The new order was built on the ashes of species that had approved genocide, administered by the survivors of the species they had tried to eliminate. It was, in its own way, the most logical outcome possible. And somewhere in the ruins of dead civilizations, the ghosts of extinct species finally understood the lesson they had been too proud to learn while they still breathed. Never threaten the children of a species that thinks in terms of centuries and loves with the intensity of stars.